El Mencho named in this new racketeering indictment today out of D.C. Prosecutors citing numerous acts of violence, including murders, assaults, kidnappings, assassinations, and acts of torture.
Tú ya sabes con quién traes la bronca. Para que sepas, aquí seguimos buscándote y no quitaremos el dedo del renglón.
¿Agua? ¿Sí? Dime recio. Que me digas con la boca.
There are a million ways to die, but then there are some fates that are worse than death. Mexican cartels are experts in dealing these kinds of punishments to victims, and El Mencho has precisely showcased several of these horrible dealings over the years. From cutting off limbs to people alive, here are the most shocking ways El Mencho responded to betrayal. Entering the world of crime and violence requires two things: guts and wits. But above all, you've got to be ruthless. El Mencho isn't just a household name among gangsters because of his intimidating army, but because of his reputation as a man who shows no mercy. How would you describe a man who is capable of dealing so much agony to a victim, to the point that death becomes a mere wish? If there was ever a title for the world's most horrifying mafia boss, El Mencho would be the undisputed winner. One of El Mencho's most miserable victims was El Cholo, a man who suffered so much that his death became an act of mercy. El Cholo had initially fled from El Mencho, fearing his wrath, but the mafia boss went to the ends of the earth and back until he finally dug up El Cholo in his supposed safe house. Once captured, El Mencho dealt with this man so badly that watching his final moments was like watching a horror movie.
Vives acostado al lado de un cuerpo, ves cómo matan a la gente, pruebas la carne humana.
In case you're wondering which organization a devil incarnate like El Mencho leads, it's the CJNG. The CJNG, alias Jalisco New Generation Cartel, is a group well renowned for its rapid rise to power. Initially, the group merely acted as movers for the Sinaloa cartel's drug shipments. They also handled the finance aspect of things, and their scope of operation ranged from Jalisco to Mexico City. However, in 2010, after Mexican security forces gunned down the former Sinaloa boss, Ignacio Coronel, things fell apart. A power tussle came for who would run the crime network in the region, and a winning faction emerged, which was the CJNG. Since then, the group has continued to spread its wings, gaining more power, reputation, and territory as the days go by. Wherever the CJNG goes, bloodshed and chaos follows. Although merely a decade old, this cartel has garnered so much influence in Mexico that they've begun to rival popular gangs like the Sinaloa. Dressed in military-grade uniforms and armed to the teeth, one look at the CJNG would tell you they mean business. In fact, it's still a wonder how El Cholo had the balls to betray this organization. To make matters worse, El Cholo didn't just betray any random member of this group, but the boss himself, El Mencho. The CJNG has always been known to be unusually ruthless and unique in the way they approach things. The real spine-chilling thing about this group isn't the gravity of the crimes they commit, but how they commit them. The CJNG, on a normal day, can put fresh human body parts on open display just to make a statement. Imagine you're casually strolling down the streets of Mexico and you see a convoy that resembles those of special military forces. That's the CJNG on any normal day. From high-grade automatic rifles to badass bazookas and custom-made tanks, the CJNG takes the phrase "armed to the teeth" very seriously. These guys aren't as large in numbers as the Sinaloa cartel, but they're the first criminal organization in Mexico to take on the government and win. The government had to learn the fury of the CJNG the hard way when some gang members brought down an armed chopper without breaking a sweat.
Mexico's government claims the New Generation Cartel of Jalisco used rocket-propelled grenades last Friday to bring down this army helicopter, killing 6 soldiers.
We heard a boom, like a bomb. They took down the aircraft. They took it down.
Mexico's Interior Minister says the shootdown comes as the Mexican government launches an offensive against the drug trafficking organization.
But then, all this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the horrors that this criminal organization has committed ever since they burst on the scene. The group has assassinated more political officials than anyone can count, and even some of the recent high-profile political assassinations of 2024 were traced back to the gang. Ever since this gang broke out in Jalisco, cases of homicides and forced disappearances shot through the roof. Cops also began to discover mass graves in the regions where this cartel operated. But then, an even more shocking fact is that the CJNG cannibalizes victims during the training of new recruits. Men, women, children, anyone can become a piece of meat for this gang if they please.
Pre-dawn raid teams scooped up 250 cartel operatives, all said to be connected to the new generation cartel known as the CJNG in Mexico.
But think for a second, if the members or so-called boys of the group can be this ruthless, how deadly would the boss be? This was the reality check El Cholo had after he crossed paths with the mafia boss. Although it may not look like it, this man had a close relationship with El Mencho, a relationship that dates back years before the CJNG became the CJNG.
And the CJNG leader, Nemesio El Mencho Oseguera Cervantes, who now has a $10 million U.S. bounty on his head. El Mencho named in this new racketeering indictment today out of D.C. Prosecutors citing numerous acts of violence, including murders, assaults, kidnappings, assassinations, and acts of torture. He is still a fugitive, believed to be hiding in Mexico.
You see, El Mencho was born in July 1966 to a family of farmers. His real name was Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, but this name wouldn't stick for very long. Oseguera Cervantes was always ambitious right from when he was a kid. By the 1980s, he had already joined the bandwagon of illegal immigrants. The young chap smuggled his way into the U.S., hoping to make some quick cash. El Mencho was never up to any good during his time in the US. He kept committing petty crimes and got busted many times for stealing, racketeering, selling drugs, and so on. He finally fled the country to join the Millennial Cartel, where he finally got the opportunity to show his natural talents in violence and crime. Mencho and Cholo met while they were both working for the Millennial Cartel. The two served as anchormen for the drug lord, El Maradona. El Cholo and El Mencho later became good friends. Cholo witnessed how El Mencho formed the CJNG from scratch using goons from his former defunct cartel. Initially, El Mencho named his cartel Los Torcidos, or the Twisted Ones, but later, this name would change, as the two men got ushered into a whole new promising leadership opportunity in the world of organized crime. But there was something about El Mencho that made his long-term friend and associate begin to fear for dear life. You see, Mencho had the features of a cartel boss. The young drug lord was ambitious, organized, and had the charisma for leadership, but he was a violent man, very materialistic and crude in his methods. El Mencho was a man who didn't mind employing dark, sinister means to get anything he wanted. El Cholo witnessed firsthand many gruesome murders and assassinations by his cartel. In fact, El Mencho had made him the second in command at some point, and he knew all of his deepest, darkest secrets. Learning all the detestable secrets of this ambitious kingpin and seeing so much violence and bloodshed on a daily basis must have been too much for El Cholo. And so, he decided to do what no one in the entire country would have dared to. He betrayed his friend and master. But you see, in the world of cartels, loyalty is one trait that's never messed with. This is why you'd hear phrases like, "Snitches get stitches." The consequence of rebellion in the cartel world is death. El Cholo soon became a real-life example of this after he was found doing things he shouldn't have. First, he began conducting hits without the permission of his boss. Now, just so you know, El Cholo was El Mencho's main hitman. However, all of El Mencho's hits were calculated moves, attacks he only launched when he was sure he'd gain from them. And so, when he learned that his long-term friend, El Cholo, was doing shit he wasn't supposed to, he became furious. Things blew up, but rather than apologizing to El Mencho, El Cholo decided to form his own cartel and declare war against his former boss. This was all too much for El Mencho and the CJNG. He needed to make a statement, to use Cholo as an example to anyone who would dare betray him. In a matter of days, El Mencho had ordered several hits on El Cholo and his miniature cartel. It was brutal. Even though a great bunch of these gang members were El Mencho's former men, he didn't give a damn. He was ready to cut down the organization before it ever grew to become a threat, and that's what he did. Initially, El Mencho's men failed to bring down the former mini-boss. In fact, the very first attempt at El Cholo's life failed so miserably that El Cholo killed the leader of the squad that was sent after him. As you'd expect, this only angered the CJNG kingpin all the more, causing him to release more firepower. The war that followed was a brutal one. El Cholo, as a smart criminal, allied with the Sinaloa cartel, obtaining men, guns, and other resources that allowed him to level the playing field against his former boss. It was a bloodbath, with bullets flying, cars on fire, blood, and brain matter spilling everywhere. No one was safe, not even civilians. Meanwhile, El Cholo kept waxing stronger. At some point, El Cholo gained so much support that it was beginning to look like he would win the war. But that's when disaster struck. On March 18th, 2021, El Cholo was captured by members of the CJNG. He was immediately brought to the boss, with gunmen flanking him on all sides. You'd think that after everything he had put the cartel through, they'd kill him on the spot. But no, they had something far more sinister planned out for El Cholo. The CJNG left the poor gangster helpless and forced him to make a confession video. El Cholo mentioned names of individuals who had helped him in his fight against El Mencho, most of whom were law enforcement officers. It was a smart move by El Mencho. Not only did he make a statement with this confession video, but he also took down all of his rivals who were working with El Mencho. Kind of like killing two birds with one stone. But all this was just the beginning for El Cholo. The real horror was what followed next. The CJNG had a lot planned for El Cholo. So much so that they had to extend his torture over the course of several days. First, he was electrocuted. For how long? No one knows. After that, his legs were destroyed and his bones shattered into 1,000 pieces. Next, his toes were to bits. His ribs were smashed in and his body was slashed with multiple cuts. But that's not the worst part. Authorities are still unsure if this next and most brutal torment came first or last. But when they discovered the body of El Cholo, his eyes were out. Plus, his tongue had been pulled out of his mouth with a vice. After the gruesome torment, El Cholo was shot twice in the head. His remains were wrapped in a plastic bag and dumped in public. This gruesome death and torture remains one of the prime examples of what El Mencho and his sinister gang can do to snitches and betrayers. And just in case you're wondering what the police are doing about this cartel, maybe you should ask yourself these questions. How do you deal with a cartel that shows no mercy or has no regard for human life? How do you crush a cartel that keeps expanding rapidly every year? And most especially, how do you stop their horrendous activities if they possess insane military power and resources?
Alan, early morning raids from Southern California to the south side of Chicago. The feds calling it Project Python, complete with a fancy full-color logo portraying a snake sinking its fangs into the neck of a charging stallion. The 6-month investigation being hailed by federal officials as the largest single law enforcement takedown in many years. The target, first identified by the I-Team 2 years ago, is Chicago's public enemy #1, a man they call El Mencho.
In case you're wondering why the CJNG are always dressed in special-grade military uniforms and armed to the teeth, it's all El Mencho's doing. The drug kingpin was inspired by the Los Zetas cartel's militarized structure, but he decided to go overkill when it came to his own, arming thousands of violent men with military-grade weapons such as assault rifles, heavy machine guns, and 50 caliber sniper rifles, one of the deadliest military-grade artillery you'd ever come across. Under the dark, sinister mentorship of the unforgiving El Mencho, the CJNG are literally devils with guns. They steal, kill, and destroy anything in their path. From rival cartels to police officers and civilians, the gang has no limits or restrictions. Plus, they've got no regard for human life. All these bad guys want to do is make money and spread terror so the whole world knows they're the new crime lords in town. How do you take down such an organization as this, especially with the leader being so remarkably notorious, devilish, and cunning? Like a snake. A typical solution would be to cut off the head of the snake, right? Well, that would work if not for the fact that, in this case, there are many heads, each of them just as deadly. You see, El Mencho isn't just some big boss sitting at the top of a mighty throne in some CJNG underground headquarters with armed goons running around. The criminal mastermind, over the years, made sure to delegate and assign mini heads to rule over portions of the cartel. This is one thing that aided the quick rise and spread of the CJNG over the last decade. It's bad enough when you're a man with the heart of a devil, but it's even worse when you recruit more devils like yourself to do your dirty work. Here's what a typical standoff between the CJNG and the Mexican military looks like. History has shown that El Mencho recruits the worst of the worst individuals, men with stone-cold hearts. A typical example of this was when the crime lord recruited Fabian Urbino Morales, aka El Payaso. Just so you know, El Payaso means the clown in Spanish. This man's creepy name wasn't just for fancy. He did work as a clown in a circus when he was younger, but he developed an appetite for guns and bloodshed later on. El Mencho discovered Fabian Morales when the latter was still working for the Gulf Cartel. The young gangster had a unique kind of psychopathic violence that El Mencho couldn't resist. One time, El Mencho and his men found El Payaso burning his rivals inside gasoline drums. His nightmarish clown mask only made things even more terrifying. By the time El Mencho brought the masked villain into his army, he earned the alias El Payaso.
¿Agua? ¿Sí? Dime recio. Que me digas con la boca.
Payaso followed the footsteps of El Mencho, turning his goons into clowns too, forming a sick clown army. But the horrifying thing about these guys wasn't their masks or the ferocious guns they wielded. Rather, it was the gruesome things they did to their victims. Poor souls who ended up dying in the worst ways imaginable. Before we go on, we must warn you, some of the details you're about to watch contain very graphic details.
Cartel members are posting videos like these on TikTok, but why are they doing this?
The abnormal thinking of these individuals led them to perform some of the most gruesome styles of execution the world has ever seen. It takes a different kind of human being to do the things these guys did to their fellow humans. Imagine peeling the skin off the face of another person, and yet filming while you're at it. Even more, these guys made jokes out of the victim mocking him. It was like they derived so much joy and pleasure from his suffering. How does a man grow to become so dark and emotionless to commit such an act? Just so you know, this incident of skinning fellow humans alive actually happened. It was filmed and uploaded online by the same psychos who did it. These are probably some of the questions that would run through your mind when you watch this clip. But be warned, it isn't for the faint of heart. This was when the devilish clowns began to taunt their victim, asking if he needed water. Imagine drinking water without the skin on your face. It should be noted here that El Mencho was the one empowering these bloodthirsty criminals to do their dirty work. In fact, he had encouraged them to do as much damage as possible. The clowns did very much show how crazy they were, and even after his death, El Payaso still remains a household name in Mexico. But it would seem El Payaso's craziness didn't end with him. You see, the CJNG today still has a habit of leaving corpses lying around, leaving them in public streets, or hanging them from bridges. Sometimes these gruesome acts are recorded and posted on social media to make a statement. And just in case you thought that men were the only psychos in El Mencho's dark army, think again. Reports have shown that lots of women have been recruited into the CJNG, but here's the shocking twist. Some of these women are even more ferocious than the men. A typical example was that of La Katrina.
Tranquila, mija, ya viene el helicóptero por ti. Ya viene el helicóptero. Tranquila, hija, tranquila. Vas a estar bien. Trata de aguantar,
If you've never heard of the name, La Katrina was a vicious monster who joined the gang back in 2017. She was just 19 at the time, but she had so much potential for violence and crime. El Mencho must have discovered this potential as he nurtured and coached the young girl into extreme violence and crime, encouraging her to torture and kill. He even empowered her to carry out hits on police officers. La Katrina was one twisted baddie you wouldn't want to mess with. With a pretty face and slender body, she had a contrasting vicious heart and was totally brutal on the battlefield. However, in January 2020, when the Michoacan police launched their mega operation against the cartel, La Katrina was one of the casualties. She was shot in the jugular and later died of her wounds while en route to the hospital. Many of the gang members were either killed or arrested that day, but still, the CJNG is as strong as ever. Their influence is even spreading, and there are rumors that they are already spreading their wings to US territory. What do you think should be done to put an end to this cartel once and for all? Do you think the horrible acts of the CJNG cartel and its boss are necessary show of force? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to smash the like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next video. See you in the next video.